Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Pratik and I'll be taking up the news today discussion for 4th of May. So let us start with the main news. So we have 5 main news today. In the first news, Finance Ministry has notified FDI easing. Second news, world's first Opto SAR satellite mission Drishti launched. Third news is Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram RBSK 2.0 guidelines have been released. Then in the fourth news, Lok Sabha Speaker has recently reconstituted 4 parliamentary committees for 2026-27. And in the last news, IMF has published a working paper on Indian MSMEs. Then we also have quick updates, and in places in news we have Philippines. So let us start with the very first news, that is about the Finance Ministry has notified certain relaxation in the FDI rules in India. Okay, and of course this is part of GS paper 3, Indian economy, and largely there are 2 major changes that have been made as part of the relaxation of FDI. One with respect to the easing of foreign firms with up to 10% of Chinese stake, right? So this whole approach is that now the companies which has Chinese investment, they can invest in India if their total investment or the total composition is less than 10%. That will be under the automatic route. The second major changes under this rules have been that now the insurance sector has been opened for the FDI up to 100% under the automatic routes. So let us understand the implication of all these moves and why these moves have been taken up by the government. So first thing we need to understand is what is FDI. Okay, so FDI, as we all know, stands for the foreign direct investment. So a country requires investment not just from the domestic investors, but also from the foreign investors. And it is primarily useful for infrastructure development. It is important for incorporating Indian companies in the global value chain. And FDIs also are very vital for creation of employment, right? So FDI serves a lot of purpose. At the same time, a country also needs to safeguard its vital sectors so that a foreign company does not get a stake which is controlling in nature, especially in areas like defense, in areas like atomic energy, right? So India also has this kind of approach where it tries to safeguard its critical sectors, but at the same time, it tries to liberalize the other areas. So for this, government has 2 approaches. It has first automatic route, where the foreign investors can invest directly under the Indian companies or the Indian markets, right? Without any government approval. It is automatic in nature. That is why it is called as automatic route. The second approach is through government approval. This requires scrutiny by government department to check the intention of the foreign companies, and only after due diligence, the foreign entities are allowed to invest in Indian companies. Now, in 2020, government made a lot of changes in the FDI rules, and that was expressed through a notification under Press Note. So Press Note 3, particularly in 2020, restricted FDI in the country. Now, 2020 was a time where 2 major developments happened. One was COVID-19 induced pandemic. So COVID-19 was there, and because of COVID-19, many of the firms were not doing very well. They had problems of supply chain, they have cash issues, right? And their business was also not doing well. Now, imagine a scenario when a domestic company is very weak and vulnerable, and at that point of time, some foreign company comes and start taking stake in those companies. So that would be very detrimental for the national security of the country. So that was one thing. The second thing was Galwan clash with China in 2020. Because of that, what government did, government released a Press Note 3, and it said that countries with which India shares a land boundary, all those countries will not be able to invest in Indian or in India under FDI through automatic route. Okay, so this was done to prevent the important sectors, right, from coming into foreign influence, especially at a time when Indian companies were vulnerable, and also to de-link and to ensure that China doesn't play this boundary and this kind of boundary and trade issues. We wanted to interlink those areas, right? So that is why this was done. But now we are 7 years or 6 years past this, like it's 2026. Much water has flown through the entire thing, right? So now we are witnessing a what is called as improvement in Indo-China ties. So Chinese and Indian ties are now improved, especially it happened after the SCO summit meet, right? So as part of that, India has also understood that India wants to relink the economic ties. As part of that, the Nathula and this various point Mansarovar Yatra has also been resumed, right? So because of that, now we are, and at the same time, we also want investment. We want investment, and most of the investment that comes through, they have certain linkages with Chinese country, right? Because China is flush with investment and it wants to divert that investment in other areas. Now, different multinational companies have some exposure to Chinese investment, and India is also following, or India wants to benefit from the China plus one strategy, which wants to have the supply chain diversification from China. So in order to do this, India has played a very balanced approach, whereby not only it has tried to attract investment, but it has also tried to safeguard its national interest. So under this, two major developments have happened. First is that India has allowed overseas entities having a Chinese holding up to 10% to invest in India up to the or under the automatic route. So under 10% it will provide India with investment, and at the same time it will not have any controlling effect on the Indian companies, right? So the second important development which has happened is that India has also opened up its insurance sector for 100% investment under the automatic route. Now earlier, this was not under the automatic route. It required some government intervention, and the sectoral limitation was also limited. So under this, private insurance company and the intermediaries such as brokers, without needing prior government approval, can invest in the Indian insurance sector. But at the same time, it comes with a rider, and the rider is that the LIC, that is Indian owned company, the Life Insurance Corporation of India, it remains strictly capped at 20%. This means that no foreign company can come and invest beyond 20%. And the reason is very simple. For India, LIC is a very important company because most of our insurance sector or insurance policy are tied to LIC, right? So we want to have control over LIC. So these two are the major changes which have been done under the recent FDI changes, right? FDI norms change. Right? And these changes were done under an act called Foreign Exchange Management Rules 2026, FEMA. You may have heard about this term, FEMA. So foreign exchange or FDI is managed through a law called as FEMA Act 1999, and this rule is based on this. Okay, so rule and act, we know how different they are. Rules are dependent, or they are framed by the executive. So in this case, it is the Ministry of Finance which is responsible for the notification of this particular rules. But in terms of act, it is basically a process where a parliamentary proceedings have to be taken place, right? Now, we have already discussed what is the importance of FDI. It helps in ease of doing business, it provides better employment opportunities, it improves spillover effect on technology transfer, etc. Right? So this is the second thing, and then we need to look at the regulatory framework for FDI in India. So what exactly is the regulatory framework? So it is done through the Foreign Exchange Management Act, FEMA 1999, and understand that FEMA is a successor of FERA that was there in 1973, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. Okay, so earlier, before FEMA, there was FERA, and FERA was enacted in 1973, and it was very restrictive in nature because at that point of time, India did not want its foreign exchange to go to other countries, and there was a huge And there was a huge requirement on due diligence, and then it also criminalized the offenses. Now, after 1991 reforms, we have changed our approach, and then we have adopted a more relaxed approach, right? So we now want to manage the foreign exchange, right, in such a way that the offenses committed under them have not been made criminal, but they are civil in nature. So in a way, in very short, we can say that FEMA is more relaxed, or it is more liberal in nature. And the purpose here is to attract foreign investment. And the purpose of FERA was to stop Indian, or to stop the dollars from going away from India, to stop foreign exchange from moving out from Indian territory. Now, and here FEMA is to attract or manage the foreign exchange reserves in the country. Next, it is administered by the Reserve Bank of India, and the nodal body for this is Enforcement Directorate. And all of us know that ED comes under Ministry of Finance. And this was part of a paper, like one of the options in the PYQ this last year was also under this, like they asked a question where they wanted you to know whether under which ministry does ED lies, okay? Then what are the objectives of FEMA? It regulates and updates foreign exchange laws. So recently we have laws plus you have rules as well. Then facilitate external trade, payments, and foreign investment. Then develop and maintain a stable foreign exchange market in India under the government policy. Right, so we have already discussed the various routes, right? So this is about the FDI policy in India, how it is governed in the country, and what changes have been recently made. Now, from the perspective of PYQ, UPSC has asked a question on the need for FDI. So they had asked a question, justify the need for FDI for the development of the Indian economy. So you have to talk about the reasons such as it helps in the integration of Indian economy with the other economies, facilitating the global value chain development, and it also provides much needed investment. It helps creation in the infrastructure. It provides spillover effect of the different technologies to Indian sector, etc. Then why there is a gap between MOU signed and actual FDIs? The reason is precisely because of the bottlenecks that India is facing in terms of the regulatory clearances, in issue of environmental clearances, land acquisition, labor issues, etc. So here you can talk about this. Suggest measures to take for increasing actual FDIs in India. So here we can mention about, we are now liberalizing various sectors. So we can mention that we have liberalized the insurance, or we have expanded the insurance sector from 74% to 100% under the automatic route. Then you can also talk about other measure with respect to companies with up to 10% of Chinese stake can also invest in India up to as per the automatic route. Then you can also mention other aspects as well in terms of the plug and play model and other areas. Then the next question is world's first OPTO-SAR or OPTO-SAR satellite mission Drishti has been launched. Now this topic is part of science and technology. Within science and technology, as part of the main syllabus, they have mentioned a specific topic, that is space technology. So here this development becomes important from both mains and prelims point of view. So in prelims, they can ask you what is mission Drishti. In mains, they can ask you role of space technology for the development of India, right? Or they can ask you a very precise question about the role played by the Earth observation satellite. Now, why Earth observation satellite? Because this mission this mission particularly is India's largest privately built Earth observation satellite, okay? And more interestingly, it is not sent by ISRO, but it is developed by a space startup. And the name of the space startup is GalaxI, okay? And it is based in Bangalore. And it sent the Indian, this satellite or this mission through SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket in US, California, right? So these are some of the details that you should know. So what is the purpose? So which startup is related? GalaxI. So this can be asked in your prelims. Then what is the nature? It is an Earth observation satellite and India's largest privately built. Again, remember, it is India's largest privately built. ISRO has sent much heavier satellite, okay? But as far as privately built is concerned, this is India's most heaviest. The second important point with respect to this is that it is, you see, world's first opto-SAR satellite. Now we need to understand what exactly is opto-SAR satellite. See, in general, in the Earth observation satellite, there are two kinds of payloads, right? There is one that is the optic based, or that is camera based, optical sensors. So in the Earth observation, so I hope you know what is Earth observation satellite. Basically, when we want to observe the Earth for various reasons, maybe it can be for checking the safety of dams, right, or for disaster management purpose, or for or checking the entire movement of troops in certain border areas, or for checking the crop or development, or any other reason. So Earth observation essentially provides a high resolution map of the Earth, and based on that, specific intelligence is provided to specific groups, such as farmers, such as the fishermen, such as the green people, those people who want development in terms of, or who want some sort of awareness with respect to the forest cover, and to government with respect to strategic positioning of various resources. So Earth observation satellite is very critical for the development and growth of the country. And generally, as far as technicality is concerned, it generally has two kind of payloads. Payloads such as optical system, and then it has SAR, that is synthetic aperture radar. So in very simple term, optical system is like a camera. It's a magnified camera through which the satellite can view Earth in a high resolution way. Okay, but the problem is, imagine there's a cloud cover, or there is something that restricts the visibility. So it doesn't work in limited visibility. So even though it provides high resolution, but it has problem when it comes to certain disturbances, it does not work very properly. Okay. The second aspect is, to overcome this, another payload is used, or another system is used, that is synthetic aperture radar. So it is like a radar, which means that it can give it can view, or it can take images of pictures despite disturbance condition. So even if there is cloud cover, or whether it is dust, etc., it can still provide a resolution, a specific granular resolution. But the problem here is that the resolution that you get from this is not very high yielding, right? It is not very as fine resolution as it is provided by the optical system. So even though it provides resolution, but it is grainy, it is not very clear. Not to overcome this problem, what this mission Drishti has done, it has combined both these payload together. And this is the first time in the world that this attempt has been done. So earlier, all the payloads either used to have the optical system or the SAR. But now, what is specific about mission Drishti is that it has combined both the multispectral imaging MSI, that is the optical system, and the synthetic aperture radar on a single platform. This is the most significant aspect, or the technical aspect, that you need to know. The second aspect is with respect to where this orbit has been. So generally, the Earth observation satellites are placed in the low Earth orbit, LEO, and they are sun synchronous. Now, LEO orbits around Earth at an altitude of about 160 kilometer to 2000 kilometer. Again, this number or this data can be important. Then what is the capability? It is all weather, day night intuitive imaging capabilities. Why? Because it has both presence of SAR and this optic system. Resolution is highest among the Indian private players. So these are some of the details that you need to know. Now, what is Opto SAR? It is an end-to-end system of hardware and software designed to work in perfect harmony. Technology that is used here is Sync Fusion Stack. Again, you just need to know the detail, not need to know the exact function of what it performs. And it addresses limitation of earlier Earth satellites, optical sensors. It delivers clear, intuitive images, but are limited by clouds and darkness, that what we have precisely discussed. Then SAR can see through the cloud cover and operate day and night, but what is the limitation here? Imagery is harder to interpret, it is granular in nature. Okay, so this is why this mission becomes important, because it combines both of them together. Now, again, this is another theme that you need to prepare, is what is the contribution of the private sector in the space exploration for growth and development of the Indian economy, right? So in this case, you need to have certain examples. So apart from this Galaxy Eye, you should also understand some other names of some of these startups which have played a very crucial role in the space sector as the private capacity. So for reference, there are certain examples. For example, Agnikul Cosmos, it was also in news as it built the world's first 3D printed rocket engine. Then you have Skyroot, which tested India's first privately built rocket. And InSpec City develops satellite life extension technologies and serves as India's fully vertically integrated platform for in-orbit servicing. So make sure that you have a couple of examples, because see, they will not ask you for specific contribution. Maybe they can ask you as a match the following in terms of the name of the satellite or the name of the company and the contribution it has played. Okay, that could be one question. Or the other question could be in terms of main, they would be asking what is the achievement of Indian space startups in terms of the growth and development of the Indian economy. So here you have to use them as examples. Okay. Next topic is Ministry of Health and Welfare has released a new set of guidelines for Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram guidelines. Okay. And this is part of GS paper 2 social issues, because in social issues we have three specific topics: health, education, and skill development. Okay, so health remains a very important topic. So within health, we have to understand the challenges in the public health system, right? And also we need to understand the sectoral or the different issues faced by different social agents. For example, with respect to women, you also need to know what are the health challenges that women face, or elderly population. And now here it is about child health. Okay, so what exactly is the government intervention with respect to child health care, and what are the challenges that we are observing, and what has been the recent development in this regard. Okay, so this mission, or this Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram 2.0 is part of what is called as National Health Mission. National Health Mission is a flagship program of the government to provide or improve quality and affordable healthcare, equitable healthcare for everyone. It has two sections: the National Urban Rural Healthcare Mission and National Rural Healthcare Mission, right? And it also is very foundational for improving the primary healthcare. Okay. Now, the earlier part, now what changes have happened and why these changes have happened. So I will tell you first why these changes have happened. Now the changes have happened because when the first phase of guidelines was introduced, the nature of changes or challenges with respect to child health was different. Earlier, the problem was to curb or control infant mortality. Earlier, the challenge was to provide nutritional security to the early child, or to provide childhood care in such manner. So largely, the purpose was to ensure that the child health is secured through early intervention, etc. But now several changes have happened. So definitely we have built upon that, but some new set of challenges have come up. And all of you would be aware that now we are looking at a certain set of paradox where undernutrition and overnutrition coexist together, which means that there is a rising prevalence of obesity in India. And it is not just limited to the adult population, it has also pervaded the children as well, right? And because of that, there is growing cases of diabetes, there is growing cases of cardiovascular diseases, plus there is also growing cases of mental health because of the changing norms in the social system, increasing adoption of the mobile phone, etc. So because of that, a holistic revision was required with respect to the foundational framework which catered to the child healthcare in India. And that is why the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has revised the guidelines. Now let's take a look into what has been the major areas of changes or the major areas of revision which have been done under the guidelines. See, first thing is that we have extended what is called as 4D framework. 4D framework means there are different stages of screening of children from birth to 18 years for 4Ds. Okay, first D stands for defect at birth. Defect at birth can be very severe, and it needs to be identified. Childhood diseases, then deficiency in terms of vitamins, minerals, etc. And lastly, development delays. It can be with respect to the development delays mentally as well as physical development delays, right? So first thing is that we have identified 4 stages or 4 areas of checking, of screening of children from till 18 years of age in terms of 4Ds. Apart from that, we have also included the new age health related challenges, including the non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, such as heart diseases, such as blood pressure, etc. They have also been added as part of the revised guidelines. Secondly, we have also added mental health conditions, right? And behavioral concerns such as increasing stress or anxiety, OCD, etc. They have also been added as part of this changes. Second approach is that now there is going to be increasing emphasis on the life cycle based approach in screening, which means that the screening will not be limited to certain milestone, but it will be added to a continuous care, right? At every stage of a child growth rather than isolated intervention. So it is going to ensure that continuous care is provided to children up to 18 years of age. Next, there are other aspects such as strong referral linkages, which means that a children or a child who has been checked by a doctor can be given, and he or she migrates, then his health data can be provided to some other doctor who can use this for reference. Secondly, there is continuity of care that will ensure continuity of care. Then digital health cards will be provided where the important digital health or health concerns or health conditions of particular children will be mentioned here. That will be easy for other doctor to understand the kind of treatment that a specific child has gone through. Then there is also going to be a growing significance of multi-sectoral convergence, which means that these aspects will also be integrated with education, with sanitation, etc. Now, what exactly is a national health mission? Because all these approaches have been ensured or has been developed under the national health mission. So it is India's flagship program for ensuring universal access. So it is for universal access. It is not a targeted approach. It is a universal part. So this is very important for us to understand. And it wants to ensure affordable. So the problem with the present medical system or healthcare system is that, especially at the tertiary level, it is very expensive. So one of the approach or one of the objectives of national health approach is to provide affordable healthcare, equitable healthcare, which means that healthcare should not just be limited to the urban areas. It should be also be provided in rural areas, in tribal areas, in various areas where the earlier system could not penetrate. And quality healthcare. Quality means that the healthcare should be up to dated. It should take into account the global best practices, etc. And it supports states' duties in strengthening the public health system. And it is the type is centrally sponsored scheme, which means that there is the fund distribution is between center and state. And it has several submissions, 2 submissions such as National Rural Health Mission, NRHM, and urban component is National Urban Health Mission. Additionally, there is a related news about diabetes mellitus, right? And in this is also related to this news only, that India has released its first ever national guidelines for managing diabetes in children. Okay. It establishes a standardized national framework for the treatment and long-term management of childhood diabetes for the very first time. Next, what exactly is diabetes mellitus? So understand that diabetes essentially has something to do with the insulin. Okay. So when the glucose levels are elevated or they are increased, then the condition is called as diabetes. Now this can happen in 2 ways. One is that from birth itself, there is problem of insulin production, and because of that, the glucose level are always high, because insulin controls glucose level. So such situation where the insulin production is very low is called as type 1 diabetes. The second condition is type 2 diabetes, where the insulin is there but it has become very uh, resistant to the control of the glucose, right? So when insulin becomes more and more resistant, it is not able to control the whole glucose level. So in this situation, what we call it is a type 2 diabetes, right? And this leads to elevated blood glucose level. And here in type 1 diabetes, people generally take oral or insulin injection. And here type 2 diabetes, again, you need to ensure that your insulin sensitivity can be increased. Okay. Then what are the other types? Gestational diabetes, which develops specifically during pregnancy, then neonatal diabetes, etc. So here what you need to understand is some of the basic causes for diabetes and what can be done to prevent diabetes among children. Next news is Lok Sabha Speaker has reconstituted parliamentary committees, 4 parliamentary committees for 2026-27. Among them, there is Estimate Committee, then Parliamentary Accounts Committee, and then there's a standing committee on the affairs of scheduled caste and scheduled committees. So there are 4 committees that have been reconstituted. Okay, so here what is important is that we understand what are parliamentary standing committee, what is the structure of parliamentary standing committee or parliamentary committees. Then we need to understand what role do they play in the whole democratic framework and what are the challenges that they are facing. So these 4 dimensions you need to cover with respect to this. Okay, of course this is part of GS paper 2 polity. So what are parliamentary committees? They are panel of members of parliament formed to scrutinize the functioning of the government and to uphold executive accountability. In very simple terms, you should understand what exactly is the role of parliament. So generally, parliament performs a lot of function, but basically it has 2 functions. The first function is to draft laws, and the second function is to ensure the executive accountability. So in India, we have Article 75 Clause 3, and Article 75 Clause 3 says that the Council of Ministers will be responsible under Article 75 Clause 3. The Council of Minister needs to be responsible to Lok Sabha. So this is the basic essence of our parliamentary democracy. So how do we know that India follows parliamentary democracy? It is through this article. Okay. Now, one of the major important aspect of parliament is that parliament seeks executive accountability. So executive is in charge of various functions, right? So how do we make sure that executive is accountable? It is through parliament. But the problem is parliament doesn't have that much capacity to go for a holistic analysis of government in all the areas, and it will also become very rigid, and we will not be able to understand the kind of nitty-gritty or specificity which is required. So in order to facilitate a better and organized way of scrutinizing the executive, all the members or most of the members, the different kind of committees or small groups are formed, and these groups are essentially, they look into specific domains of some financial aspects or some different aspects and then they sort of get or take accountability of the executive, right? So they look into or they overview the functioning of executive in those areas and see to what extent the executive has performed its task well or not. So this is the whole idea about parliamentary standing committee. And in terms of the structure of parliamentary standing committee, it is of 2 types. There is standing committee. So it is standing committee, and then there is ad hoc committee. See, standing committee is the one which you are most familiar with, right? It could be the estimates committee, parliamentary committee on this PSUs, right? Public sector undertaking. Then there is estimates committee, and department related standing committees. So most of these committees or committees to inquire about certain issues such as parliamentary committee with respect to the welfare of SC, ST, etc. So these are standing committee and they are permanent in nature. So they are permanent, but they are still created for a period of 1 year, and after 1 year they have to be reconstituted. So this is what has happened, that 1 year has lapsed since the creation of 4 parliamentary committees, and now they have been reconstituted. Then ad hoc committees are temporary committees which are formed in response to a specific problem. For example, when the 2G scam was there, like was highlighted by the CAG, then a joint parliamentary committee was formed. So parliament, this can be select committee or it can be joint parliamentary committee. Select committee generally means that it constitutes members of only one house, and joint committee means that it constitute members from both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, right? So this is about some basic information about parliamentary committees. Now we have already discussed what exactly is their function. First is that it provides continuous legislative oversight, because parliament generally functions only during the sessions that are conducted from time to time, such as the monsoon session and the winter session, etc. So within this, even if the sessions are not ongoing, still the parliament can contain or check or make an oversight of the functioning of the executive through the parliamentary committees. Secondly, it provides for detailed scrutiny of policies and laws. And third, it provides performance evaluation of the government bodies such as your PSUs, and it provides very effective suggestions for them to improve upon. So this is about the significance of the parliamentary committees. But at the same time, there are various challenges. Now, what are the challenges? First is that their recommendations are non-binding in nature, which means that government is not bound to accept their recommendation. Second, there is delay in the constitution of committees. So generally there is given 1 year for their whole entirety of functioning. But sometimes there is problem where the speaker or the chairman delays in terms of their reduce their efficiency, right? Because there is delay in their constitution. Thirdly, there is bypassing of the committees, especially some of the important laws such as Article 370, abrogation, or the election of chief election commissioner and other election commissioners bill 2023 were completely bypassed by the parliamentary committees. Then this problem of low attendance and absenteeism, where we see that in certain committees there is very low attendance, and this reduces the effectiveness and the depth of the discussions. Then this problem of expert advisor which are not present in the various committees meeting, and this was recommended by Venkat Chelaiya Commission. Apart from that, we have also seen partisan approach in the functioning of the parliamentary committees, which is a very unfortunate thing, because the whole reason why parliamentary committees were formed were because they wanted to ensure that the parliamentary work is sort of insulated from the political backlashing, right? So these were some of the challenges that the parliamentary committees face. Now, in terms how do we improve them, again we can just invert all these points, and then we can say that the meetings should be done very regularly, it should be constituted very early, then expert committees should be invited for their meetings, plus as far as possible government should take their advice as binding, and if government is not taking their advice, then definitely government should explain why it has not acted upon their advice. So some of these things can be mentioned as part of the reforms. Now, UPSC had asked a question on parliamentary standing committee. Explain the structure of the parliamentary committee system. Here you can talk about the ad hoc and the standing committee system, along with example. How far have the financial committees? So what are the financial committees? Committees such as Committee on Estimates Committee, Parliamentary Accounts Committee, then you have department related standing committees, Committee on PSUs, COPU, etc. How they have helped in the institutionalization of Indian Parliament. You can talk about how they have provided expertise, how they have provided detailed scrutiny, all these things you can mention within this. The next news is about IMF report, and this report is about the functioning of MSMEs, especially in the light of the uh, digitization process in the Indian economy. And it's the report has given a very optimistic approach or a very optimistic idea that earlier the whole perception was that because of digitization process, a lot of small, medium, micro enterprises were not doing really well because they had so much problems in terms of understanding the process, compliance things, etc. But as per the IMF report, it has in a way shattered this myth about digitization process. And what IMF has said, that micro, small and medium enterprises have done definitely well in terms of utilization of the digitalization process in the country. And it has said that states that have implemented the more of these reforms, the digital reforms, have recorded higher total productivity of MSMEs. Now, what is higher total productivity? It means that all the factor of production, such as land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, they have been using lesser input and more output has been produced by MSMEs. Okay. So all in all, the verdict is that MSMEs have done or utilized digitization process in a better way. Now, here we need to understand, in light of this, what exactly is the significance of MSMEs for the Indian economy. So largely for us, for Indian economy, the significance lies in the fact that MSMEs are very critical for the Indian GDP, right? They contribute around 30% of Indian GDP. And not only that, they account for 35% of country's manufacturing output. So first thing is their contribution in GDP. Second thing is their contribution in export. So as per recent report, MSME sector contribute close to 35% of the, or 45% of India's export in 2023-24, which is a significant number. Then they have also a very huge potential for employment generation, where they're responsible to for 60% of total employment in India. So anytime we promote MSME policy, it has a very important spillover impact on the employment generation, right? Not just the employment generation, in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality, because most of these works that are created under the MSME sector, they largely fall for the disadvantaged section of the society, especially women and the marginalized sections, right? So especially women-led MSMEs drive the gender inclusive growth and social mobility. More importantly, MSMEs are also very important for rural revitalization, especially the agri-based and rural-based MSMEs. They strengthen the village economies and curb distress-driven migration. So again, they are very important to ensure that rural people do not move out to urban areas out of distress, right? And because it creates local opportunities for jobs, for value addition through agro processing, etc. So these are some of the very important significance that MSME have on the Indian economy. Next, we should also understand, in light of this, what initiatives have the government taken for their growth and development. So we will understand this more once we have an idea about the challenges that they face. So largely the challenges that the MSME face is in terms of credit access, in terms of market access, and in terms of the skill development, right? So 3-4 major challenges they face. And to address these challenges, government take certain measures from time to time. So first, for example, the PM Vishwakarma scheme is a skill development mission, and it is essentially to enhance the quality and reach of products by local artisans. And it is not just at the domestic level, but also at the global level. So PM Vishwakarma is for skill development of the traditional craftsmen. Then Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program. So we have discussed the contribution of MSME in employment. It is around 60%, right? So we have understood that if we promote the MSME sector, it will create more employment. That is why this whole Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program has been linked with the MSMEs, right? Through establishment of the micro enterprises in the non-farm sector. Then scheme for fund for regeneration of traditional industry, that is Sphurti. Again, this is very much similar to the PM Vishwakarma scheme, but here it is about fund is to be provided to the traditional craftsmen for collective or clusters. Then there is public procurement policy for micro and small enterprises. Just like we have MSP for the agro products, government has also a policy for procurement of products from the micro and small enterprises. This not medium but micro and small enterprises mandates that 25% of annual procurement by central ministries and the PSUs must be procured from the MSEs, not MSMEs, but MSEs. Okay, so make sure that you know these distinction. Also, you should know what is the classification for categorizing a sector as a micro, small, and medium enterprise with respect to manufacturing and services, right? So make sure that you comment this when you see this. Right, so in terms of PYQ, UPSC has asked a question on faster economic growth requires increased share of manufacturing sector in GDP, particularly of the MSMEs. Comment on the present policies of the government in this regard. So we have discussed this in detail now, right? Next, let's talk about the place in news. And the news that we are going to discuss is Philippines with capital Manila. And why it was in news? Because there was an active volcano in Philippines, and it was Mayon volcano. It got erupted, and it has been erupting for a very long duration. And because of that, thousands of people have now been vacated from this. Okay, and it has led to tremendous eruption of magma, and it has also been classified as grade 3 alert system in Philippines, right? So here we need to understand the location parts. So it is an island country, so it doesn't have any land border with any country, and it is in Western Pacific Ocean. Though this is Pacific Ocean, this is Western Pacific Ocean. And the water bodies, it has Philippine Sea towards its east, then Celebes Sea towards its south, this is Celebes Sea, then Sulu Sea towards southwest, and South China Sea. This part is towards west and north. And you should also know that China and Philippines have several maritime dispute in the South China Sea, especially with respect to Scarborough Shoal, right? And I think in 2016, an international tribunal decided to give the whole mandate in favor of Philippines, but China refused to accept that. And this is why we are saying that China has been becoming very aggressive in the South China Sea and using what is called as wolf warrior diplomacy. Now, what are the geographical features of Philippines? The highest point is Mount Apo. Rivers are the important rivers are Cagayan River, then Mindanao and Agusan. What are the main islands? Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And what are the active volcanoes? So this is important. Mayon is very important. Then Bulusan and Canlon. So this one is the one that got erupted recently. Okay. Now let's discuss quick updates. So first is about cell broadcast system. I'm sure all of you may have witnessed, like on Saturday at around 11:40 a.m. All of phones were buzzing with and they were buzzing really loudly. And this was part of a government initiative called Cell Broadcast System. And this is an emergency system where government would want to inform the citizen to take certain action. Okay. Now, what is CBS? It is a telecom-enabled public warning system that enables authorities to broadcast simultaneous geotagged alerts to mobile devices within a defined area. So simply it means that if a disaster strikes, then government will be able to inform a group of people or multiple people, millions of people with one single text or message, right? And it is integrated with CAP-based Sachet platform. And it is an indigenous technology developed by the Center for Development of Telematics, that is CDOT, under the Department of Telecommunication, in collaboration with NDMA and the Ministry of Home Affairs. It overcomes the limitation of traditional SMS-based systems. So basically earlier we had the approach of sending SMS system, but the problem with SMS system was that it could be sent one at a time. And secondly, the problem was that most of people SMS could be ignored, because either it would be in silent mode, or it would be uh, like people would not understand that it is an alert message for a specific disaster, right? So the whole idea is that people would take it seriously. That is why it has to be said, or a critical information has to be passed in a different way, right? So that is the whole idea about the cell broadcast system. The second news is about Girmityas. And the External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, has recently visited Jamaica, Suriname, Trinidad, and Tobago. And apart from their strategic importance in the Pacific Island nation, what is important is that it is also important for Indian diaspora. So Indian diaspora is a very important topic when it comes to GS Paper 2 international relations. And there we need to understand the specific diaspora in these countries, in these part of countries which are called as Girmityas. Now, Girmitya is a word that you will not find in any language, okay, because it is what is a very different, or it is something that is taken from a word called agreement. So Indian slavery was banned world over, or slavery were banned by Britishers in 1833. So they could not take laborers for the plantation sector as part of slaves. They had to be taken as per their own willingness, and some sort of agreement was to be signed. And they were called as, this agreement was under endangered system. Endangered basically mean agreement, right? But the people who were taken from the Indian subcontinent, largely they were from UP and Bihar, and they could not pronounce the word agreement. So they ended up pronouncing this word as girmit. In Bhojpuri, in Awadhi, they would say it Girmit. And then those people who went as part of Girmit were Girmitias. Okay, so this is this whole idea that Girmitias, and then they filled the labor shortage caused by the British slavery abolition of 1833. And then we have talked about what is this pronunciation. And the distribution is in Mauritius, Fiji, West Indies, Mauritius, South Africa, Caribbean, and this area. Then the source regions, largely they are taken from Eastern UP and Bihar. Significance is that they are very important, because those people who have gone to these places continue to stay there, and they still practice Indian practices. They still follow Chhat Puja or various practices that they have taken from their from their state, right? And from the IR perspective, what is important is that it enhances India's soft power diplomacy, right? So this is about Girmityas. Next, Sinbacks exercise. Now, what is important here is that this, with which country this has been taken? It is with Cambodia, right? So Indian Army contingent departs to Cambodia for second edition of India-Cambodia bilateral military exercise, which is Sinbacks. Now, in any military exercise, what you need to know is with which country we are having this exercise for, where it is being held, what is the purpose. But most importantly, if you know about any sort of this exercise, you should just know with which country we are following this. And since Cambodia is part of Southeast Asia, we can also understand that with ASEAN country, right, our relationship is not merely economical in nature, but it is also gaining a lot of strategic depth, because now we are also operationalizing, and we are enhancing the interoperability, coordination, and operational synergy between the two contingents, right? So these are some of the importance that you can take into account. Then fugitive economic offenders, and the Enforcement Directorate has declared 21 people as fugitive economic offenders. The most famous of them were Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, Mehul Choksi, etc. Over the past 7 years, according to its annual report. So what is FEO, or foreign fugitive economic offenders? So FEO is an individual against whom an arrest warrant has been issued for committing scheduled economic offenses. Scheduled economic offenses are very serious financial problems that are being committed. And here there is a quantitative thing that you need to know, that here it should be exceeding 100 crore, right? And who has left India to avoid persecution or refuse to return to face trial, and it has been defined under a specific act called Fugitive Economic Offenders Act of 2018. Under this, the property of the offender is seized in India. Okay. And what are these offenses which are part of the scheduled list? Counterfeiting government stamps or currency, check dishonor, money laundering, transactions defrauding creditors. Okay, so this part, transaction defrauding, Vijay Mallya has basically been part of this transactions defrauding creditor. Okay. Next is about Asian Development Bank. And what is important here is that you need to know that it has launched a $70 billion plan for energy digital infrastructure in Asia Pacific. Act it includes Pan Asia Power Grid Initiative and Asia Pacific Digital Highway. So these are the two initiatives under this. Apart from this, what is ADB? It's a multilateral development bank that supports sustainable, inclusive, and resilient growth across the Asia Pacific. It has 31 members at its establishment in 1966, and now it has 69 members, out of which 50 are from Asia and 50 are from Asia and Pacific, and 19 from outside. So it means that it also has members from outside Asia Pacific. And the key stakeholders are Japan and USA with 15.6% of the total share, China, India, and Australia. And its headquarters is in Manila, Philippines. Prasar Bharati, recently you may have seen that Mr. Prasoon Joshi has been made the chairperson of Prasar Bharati, right? So what we need to know is what exactly is the objective of Prasar Bharati. So it's an autonomous body, statutory body that serves as India's public broadcasters. Under this, you have Doordarshan for TV production and Akashvani for your radio. So mission to provide a fair and balanced information on public interest free from opinion or bias, and this comes from Article 19(1)(a), right? Focus areas: education, literacy, agriculture, rural development, environment, health, and science. So even now you can get the most credible information on various policy matters through Doordarshan. Okay. Now what is next is MRI system, and this was in news because recently AIIMS has introduced India's first portable MRI system for the patient. So earlier patients had to be taken to a specific room where the MRI would be done, but now MRI can now be moved to the patient, right? That will be very useful for the safety of the patients, because most of the times when the patient is in ICU, it is very difficult for them to bring to the MRI buildings. So what is MRI? It is magnetic resonance imaging system. It's a medical imaging technique that uses a magnetic field and computer generated radio waves to create detailed images of the organs and tissues in our body. So essentially it is a high resolution camera, just like we had discussed about synthetic aperture radar. So this is also doing the same thing only, and it is providing a detailed image of the organs and the tissues in your body. And more importantly, it is a non-invasive, which means that it doesn't require some sort of surgery for a medical professional to examine your organs, tissues, and skeleton system. And on that basis, the medical professional can understand the kind of problem that you are facing. So it produces high resolution images of the inside of the body that help diagnose a variety of conditions, including the tumors, etc. Okay. Then Lipulekh Pass. Now Lipulekh Pass has been recently opened as part of the resolution, or as part of growing improvement in ties of India and China. And Lipulekh Pass is in Uttarakhand in the Pithoragarh district, right? From where it provides the best access to the Mansarovar Yatra. Okay. And the problem is that Nepal claims this area as part of its own territory. Therefore, it has objected to India resuming the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra through the Lipulekh Pass. It says that this whole area belongs to the Kalapani region, which should ideally be part of Nepal as part of the Treaty of Sagali of 1816, right? But the fact is, India does not recognize these claims, and India has dismissed these claims and has said that historically India has been using Lipulekh Pass for trade and various other areas for increasing ties with Tibet, right, through the Lipu Lake Pass. So whatever disputes or whatever concerns that Nepal has raised does not stand very true, right? So what exactly is Lipu Lake Pass? It is a location that is in high altitude mountain pass in the Kumaon region of Uttarakhand, and it is at the tri-junction of India, Nepal and China or Tibet. It connects the Indian state of Uttarakhand with the Tibet region of China, and that is why it is very critical for the safety and strategic requirement of India. More importantly, it provides the direct access to Mansarovar Yatra. Okay, so apart from this, we also have several other passes through which we conduct trade, such as the Lipu Lake, such as the Shipkila Pass, which is in Himachal Pradesh, or the Nathula Pass, that is in Sikkim. So you should just need some of the important passes and where they are located in which state. That would be important component of prelims exam. Then altitude, it lies at the altitude of approximately 5,334 meters or 17,500 feet, right? Right, so this is all about the news today discussion. I hope this was useful. Make sure that you attempt the questions, and yes, all the best. Thank you.